So welcome to the stage, Adrian KC.
Hello. Right, this will become obvious why I'm carrying an IKEA bag in a minute. Now, I don't want to be too, well, not disrespectful. I don't mind being a bit disrespectful. I don't want to be too disrespectful, but baby boomers, right, are quite a lot like old IKEA furniture, aren't they? They are. You know, they're everywhere. They're everywhere. You know, you couldn't turn around without falling over a baby boomer, could you? And they take up a lot of space. And if they were assembled, even using the instructions correctly, there's probably a piece left over or a piece missing, isn't there? Which later turns out to be quite crucial. And they're like, well, it probably doesn't matter, you know, it would probably be all right. And to be fair, it probably was. But there'll be one like with a wobbly leg, and another perhaps with no nuts, and possibly one slightly unhinged. But of course now, decades later, they're being slowly dismantled, aren't they? But they're still in control and on top of things. But we know one thing about baby boomers, and that is that they are never going to die. And we know this because we have evidence, because Keith Richards is still alive. Okay, although there is a rumour that actually he's dead, but no one's told him. So I suppose possible. So I can get rid of this now. Ooh. So, now I think it's important that, because I'm not sure if everybody here knows what all these generations are, some of you might not even know which generation you're in, so that was you're in, not you're in, by the way, I'd said that. So look, this is what it is. So we got baby boomers, that's basically the 20 years after the war, Generation X, which is my generation, which is like, I would say more early 60s than mid 60s, but anyway, to 1980. And those are the two generations that I'm really going to talk about mostly. And the dates don't really matter because, you know, there's debate. They overlap anyway, so it's the concept that's important. And then we have the generations after Generation X, which I call the Duolingo generations. And basically, you've got a sort of interaction I would have with a Gen X, a Gen Z or a Gen Y or whatever, most likely going to be in a restaurant where I'll be sitting there and they'll come over and they'll say, do you have any food allergies? And I'm like, no, they hadn't invented them when I was at school. Of course I don't. No, honestly, we were only allowed to have asthma. That was it. No second choice there, and which I didn't, so, you know. But the reason I call them the Duolingo generation is because they're always on the phone, aren't they? Doing Duolingo, no, I'm learning words. And then they say, they post on Facebook or something, don't they? And they say, 834 straight days on Duolingo. I know 5,000 Spanish words. And you're like, oh, that's quite good, isn't it? Está bueno. ¿Hablas español, amigo? And they say, what? And you're like, no. ¿Qué? Not what. But they can't string a sentence together, which I guess doesn't really matter because, quite honestly, they're never going to pick up the phone and call someone, are they? So, yeah, there we go. But so, baby boomers, back to where we were. So, what have the baby boomers ever done for us? Well, they gave us Monty Python, first off. So, apart from Monty Python, what have the baby boomers ever done for us? Well, pop music, rock music, fashion. They did actually have a cultural and social revolution, which led to the invention of the teenage, which didn't exist before. If you look back at photographs of kids, 100 years ago, they were like dressed as children till they're about 10, and then suddenly they're dressed like adults. So there was no teenage. So they also got us a lot of rights and liberties, most of which we still have, but there are people who are trying to take those away, so don't let that happen. And they gave us computers. That's the thing, and pollution. They give us pollution, actually. That is definitely one thing they gave us. And they gave us the internet, which is another pretty cool thing, actually. And they democratized stuff. So, in other words, we could all live the lives that we now expect. We could have, we could have stuff. We could buy things. We could consume things. We could have a car, vacations, and our own home. And that's actually quite a key part of this. Is that as Gen Xers, we were able to buy our own homes. I'm sorry, Duolingos, you never will be able to. Love you. This is a key thing because it means we have an asset, right? And that's actually quite important here. Now, saying that the baby boomers gave us computers and they gave us the internet, this is a generation which I don't believe built those companies because, as you probably know, baby boomers are famous for not being able to program a VCR. The very idea that they built Microsoft and AOL is just nuts. And I'll tell you who actually built them. Generation X, because we've been in their wake all these years, in the wings, waiting as they dominate everything. They've made every political decision, every democratic decision that we've had in my lifetime has been made by baby boomers, basically. And if you, going back to when I was a child, if you were looking at a school, so I'd say to my mum, oh, you know, I'd like to go to that school when I'm a bit older. And then she'd say, well, you can't, darling, because they're going to close it down and they're going to demolish it because there's no baby boom anymore. And this was the story of our lives. Everything you thought, oh, I'll do that, that'll be great, that'll be so exciting. And then it was closed down before we got there, which is, you know. So we're used to that. So we're like the fleas in the jar, the fleas in the jar thing where if you put the fleas in, they'll jump out, but you put a lid on. The idea is they bang their head a couple of times and then they don't try again. And that's pretty much been Gen X. Now what's changed is this. The baby boomers have stopped. They've actually stopped. They've retired. They've sold their businesses. They've gone to live in Florida or Spain. And this is brilliant because as Gen X, we didn't miss our opportunity. We just never had one. But now it's here. This is our moment. And because we have assets like a house, it means we can actually take advantage of that. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But when we went into the workplace, it was the same thing. There was a really interesting thing that happened, actually. Late 70s, you had full employment. And that obviously hasn't happened since, but most of the Western countries had full employment. And that brings on an interesting thing, which is that you've got staff that are really good at their job, are qualified and so forth. And you want more people because you want to grow the business. But guess what? There aren't any more people, only the people you rejected before. So your choice is, do you either not grow? Well, obviously they're going to grow. So they had to employ people that they'd already turned down, pay them more than the people who were actually doing the job already that were better qualified. And those people never left those jobs ever because they knew they would never get a chance like that again. And that made it really difficult for us in Generation X going into the workplace in the 80s. Recession in about 1981. I remember in England it was the first time we had 1 million unemployed since the war. So that was quite a big deal. So these people never left their jobs. But anyway, we did get on and we just kept our heads down over these years. And I think during lockdown, because actually you had a really good lockdown here in Sweden, didn't you? Basically, you could just do what the hell you wanted. As far as I could work out, 50 people in a room. Oh, do me a favour. Well, we had quite a bad lockdown in England, and so I was in my house in London, and I'm thinking, you know what? I'm a prisoner in my home, but I'm also a prisoner in my business because it's not worth enough for me to sell and like walk away. So I've spent the last 5 years studying ways to build wealth and also health as well, because there's another really important thing that has happened which affects Gen X. We know there's so many baby boomers that are still alive. They're 25, 30 years older than most of us. So if they're 25, 30 years older and they're still alive, we can expect to live longer than that. So in fact, most of us are probably halfway. If we're in our 50s or early 60s, we've probably got that long again. Well, that means you need two things. You need health and you need wealth. And I've been studying ways to improve both of those, ways to have wealth through our lives and importantly, health. And there's been so many advances in healthcare and wellness and so forth. This is absolutely realistic. Now, if there are any Gen Xers in the room, are you excited about that? Is that the emotion you've got? Yeah, it's fantastic, isn't it? So what I want to do is to take a number of you, as many as I can with me. This here, by the way, this is a baton. This is the sort of thing they use in relay races, and the baby boomers were like passing the baton one to another for years, and then they've stopped. So they just left it there, lying on the ground. There was no news flash. There wasn't a news article that said, guess what? The baby boomers have stopped. Gen X, go. They didn't say that. So most people, I think, are just retiring now, thinking, we're just going to peter out and not do anything for the rest of our lives. And the question is, it's there on the track. Are you going to pick it up? And I know what some of you will say is that, yeah, well, that's all very well, Adrian, but if I bend down, it might be a bit difficult to get up again. So, but pick it up. Here we are. Join me, because I'm trying to take as many people as I can with me, and so that we can just start the second half of our lives and really make a difference and just do all the things. We're the first digital generation and the last analog generation. We've got so much to offer, and join me. Let's do it. Thank you.